This week's Torah portion is the portion of Chaya Sara, which is about the life of the conclusion, the culmination, and the wondrous life of Sarah. Sarah, the mother of the Jewish people, the first of the four mothers of the Jewish people. And it comes to tell us that we have to recognize that the most important things that we're charged with in our life is the concept of coming together as a family and coming together to take care of our family. And we see that from the very first opening of the Torah portion, where Abraham is taking responsibility to bring his wife to a proper funeral, to a proper burial. And we were talking earlier in the class of the concept of what comes from holiness and what comes from the side of not holiness, from the side that goes against God Almighty. And we could see the importance of bringing person to a proper, a respectable burial, which is something that we are seeing made war against in our very times over the last almost 2 years now. The whole 18 months, the whole concept of preventing people from having funerals, even trying to urge that people should not even be allowed to be buried. And this is going directly against God's vision for humanity. And we see that the lessons of our fathers are supposed to be, the actions of our fathers are supposed to be an example and a tracing out of the potential that we could fulfill and bring into action in our own lives. So we have to know that the concept of both in life and in the ending of life, the beginning of life and the ending of life, of taking care in an honorable way of every single person is something that's a fundamental part of God's plan and God's visions for the Jewish people and for all the Gentile nations and for every single individual. We see that Abraham, our father, then takes on the responsibility of continuing to bring more children into the world by finding a soulmate for his son Isaac. And it records in great detail the efforts of his servant Eliezer to go and, under his instructions, to go and find a fitting mate for him, a fitting wife for him. And we see the power of prayer, the power of asking God Almighty to guide every single detail. And we see from the story of how Eliezer prayed to God Almighty relentlessly, in spite of the fact that Abraham was very wealthy and Isaac was a great, renowned young man. So you would think that everything's made for them, but yet he was entirely devoted, because of his training from Abraham, our father. He was entirely devoted to turning to God Almighty for everything. And that's what every human being needs to know, that every human being has an obligation. Every man, woman, and child has an obligation to turn to God Almighty, both to express gratitude and to express requests and troubles and ask for help from troubles, to ask for God's mercy, and that things should work out in a revealed good way. That's our job and our responsibility. And while the fixed times for prayer for the Jewish people is something that the fixed times themselves are not necessarily applicable to the Gentiles, but nevertheless, two things we have to remember. A Jew also has to pray all day and not only at the times of the fixed prayers. And a Gentile is meant to be praying all the entire day, also in every moment and every opportunity and every detail of their life. And we see from Eliezer's example that he was devoted to fulfill the mission given to him by Abraham, our father, that he was devoted to that. He understood the importance of it, and he was connected to him, and therefore wanted to carry out every single detail. And he asked God that God should reveal himself in every single detail to guide his shlichus, to guide his mission that he was carrying out, that in every single detail it should be clear what the right thing was to do. He should not be left in any sort of doubt and confusion. And we see that God Almighty fulfilled that in great detail. And the Torah goes on in great detail to explain how this occurred, meaning to teach us how every detail in our life, the detail of how a marriage comes about, how a spouse is found, and every single detail in the miracle of bringing a child into the world, every single detail is guided and directed by God Almighty. So this is what we can learn from this week's Parsha, and to recognize that we need to reinstill in humanity the basic concept of that the purpose of a man is to find a spouse and to bring children into the world. And that is what he needs to do, because God Almighty wants humanity to multiply. God Almighty wants there to be more people in the world in his image. That is something that God requires and requests of every single human being, and gives a blessing for that from every single human being. So it's our job to make sure that when we see that there's people who are off track and promoting other ideas and saying it's okay for a man to remain unmarried or a woman to remain unmarried, we can't say to ourselves, you know what, that doesn't affect me because that is not really relevant. How does it affect me, what they're doing? Well, it does affect us, because the success of God's plan in the world, God's vision in the world, is based on every person doing their part to bring more beautiful human beings into the world. That is his vision. That is his command. When there's a person who's not doing his part, and he's saying that he feels that his genetic, or his not just his genetic, his entire existence is not deserving of being reproduced and replicated in the world, it's an affront to God Almighty, who's gifted him with life at every moment. And it's a terrible tragedy for that person. So it's a tragedy for him, and it's a tragedy for all of us, because we know, as the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that every human being is created in God's image. And therefore, he has a uniqueness and a unique beauty to this person that is meant to be carried on from generation to generation, a unique contribution that's meant to be carried on from generation to generation. So our appeal to every single person is to ignore the seductive ideas of turning away from bringing children in the world, whether those are based on the seductions of enticements or the seductions of logic and the expenses and whether there's enough space in the world and population, whether there's too many people, and all these kind of things are just distractions to twist our minds and our emotional energy into doing something that is not in our own best interest, both in the short term and the long term. And therefore, the way forward is for each person to reconnect themselves with the Torah and to God Almighty's message for all of humanity, and God Almighty's oneness, like we learn in the class, the gate of oneness, to know, no, you are worth bringing more children into the world. You are worth being carried on into the next generation. You are valuable enough, and more than valuable enough, to bring more children into the world. And no matter what you think your worth is, you have to look at yourself from God's vision, God's view of yourself, which is that you are so worthwhile and so valuable that he's putting the effort into creating you at every instant and taking care of you from the beginning of your birth until now, this moment, and will continue to do so. So don't get lost in your own thoughts that other people try to promote in your mind, that you're not worth reproducing. Rather, you are worth reproducing. You're reproducing to the maximum capacity possible. And that is God's vision for all of humanity. And that's what we can learn from this week's Parsha, from this week's Torah portion, and take that to heart and know that it's not enough for us to create that atmosphere in our own houses and own homes, but to really bring that message to the entire world and help every person pull himself up to live according to the divine image, so that more beautiful human beings can come from him and from her. And that increase in the world's population will bring blessing and abundance. God assures us of the blessing and abundance that will come to every single human being, from ourselves having more children and from every other human being having children, that brings prosperity and abundance and God's blessing to all of humanity, which will culminate very soon, including right now, with the building of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, which will be a house of prayer for all the nations, and will merit to see then, and already starting now, the complete and awesome abundance of God's creation, that there is no limitation, that every single creature is provided for, and then the entire occupation of the world will be only to know about God's oneness, and we should merit that now, immediately. Amen. Good Shabbos.